Welcome to the Landlady Listens. The podcast where we talk all things real estate, development, and the mindset it takes to build your dream life. Okay, hey guys. It's Landlady. I'm your host, Meg Hayden, real estate broker, new construction expert, and a believer in making big visions into a reality. So if you're ready to build it, dream it, and live it, let's dive in. Hey guys, it's Meg Hayden with the Landlady Listens. We are so excited for today's podcast. We're talking about appraisals. So interesting and necessary. And I feel like a lot of times we have no idea how the appraisals come about, what we need. So we're going to talk a little bit about single family homes for developers, as well as multi-units and how those kind of get priced out. So without further ado, hi.
Hi, Meg. Thanks for having me.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Just introduce yourself.
Oh, sure. I'm Jamie Moore. I'm Jamie Moore Appraisal. I've been doing appraisal work for about 35 years or so in Rhode Island the whole time. I started out in 1985 as a realtor with RE/MAX, a couple of other places, and RE/MAX was the last place. And then in 1990, so 5 years later, I kind of went into the appraisal business full time. So that's all I've been doing since 1990. But I know a lot of the people in the state, and hopefully people have gotten good information from me over the years, but happy to give out whatever information I can to you.
Yeah, I think I'm always interested in the appraisals, especially with new construction. So let's just dive right into it. When you are looking at a single family house, specifically, we'll start off with new construction. What does that look like?
So basically, I think when we were talking off before this, square footage. I think people take different notes as to what square footage is and say they might think something that's really not the way an appraiser can look at it. So if we talk about single family or even multifamily, square footage starts at first floor level. I mean, basement level's included in the report, but that's not part of gross living area. Gross living area, GLA, living area, they have different words for it, but basically the living area that's above grade is what is noted to be the gross living area of a property. That can get a little bit changed up. We'll talk a bit about condominiums and all as well, or even multifamilies, but just the average single family, the square footage is what's going to be the first floor, second floor, and if there's more than that. And you measure, we do exterior measurements only, so I know a realtor will go in and measure the interior dimensions of rooms for the sake of buyers placing furniture and all. Not that I don't like to see interior dimensions, but when we measure the outside typically. There are reasons now to do interior measurements with a laser, specifically if there are cathedral ceilings and there are two-story foyers and things where you've got area that is cut out. Second floor doesn't come, fully second floor because there's a whole area that's lofted from the first floor. So we have to take that information or that square footage out of the building sketch when we sketch the floor plan. But for the most part, it's the above grade and it's anything heated and finished. So third story, even though that's above grade, if it's a walk-up attic, but it's not heated, it would not be included in gross living area. It would be given value as a walk-up attic. And if it's finished, it would be given a little more value. But if you don't have it heated, then it's not given full value as gross living area. So some people think, well, there's a walk-up attic and I've got carpet on the floor, but it really is the heating part of it that's needed too. And that could just be putting up baseboard heat, not necessarily something that's plugged in and you can remove, but a baseboard element would consider that heated area. So first floor, second floor, third, whatever. And then garages, they're not included in gross living area. Typically they're, unheated space. But if you've got an area above a garage that's been made into an additional existing dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit, that, of course, is gross living area. I tend to add that separately in a different line item because it's not attached maybe to the main dwelling. some people would look at it, well, if you can go from the main dwelling up a set of stairs over the garage, then they'd include it because it's all inclusive. But if it's a separate entity of its own, it would be given separate value. But certainly it would be strong value based on that it is finished living space.
Mm-hmm. So heat.
Heat's important.
Heat's important. So when you're doing the exterior, then you're not looking at like hallways and stuff.
Oh, well,
stuff.
that's all
that
included in because I'm looking at the exterior. I'm including when you're doing your room dimensions and you're doing your interior layout. Sometimes those things get a little bit lost because they're not part of a room. But when I'm doing my measurement, I'm only measuring the exterior, which includes all that.
Yeah, so like 16 by 10, whatever.
Right. So if a typical ranch is 40 by 24. That's including your stairs and all that, and that's all part of the 960 square feet of the house. The times when it gets tricky is if you're dealing with a two-family house, and if it's legal two-family, and there are some, I always have to check at the town hall because whenever I see a basement unit with a kitchen and a bath and all that especially, I kind of think, ooh, I don't know if that's really legal because it's below grade. But there have been some that are legal, and they've been deemed a legal unit by the town. And so I'm not going to fight that. If it is a legal unit, then fine. And if it's below grade, which typically wouldn't be given credit as square footage, that would be given credit as square footage because now it's a unit. So it's not just a basement, it's actually a legal unit. And condominiums sometimes, if they've got a below grade space, even though maybe they're built one level above grade, then you go down for part of the gross living area. If the town and or the developer deemed it as living area, then that could be included as gross living area as well because that's the way it's been looked at. But usually the living area or the area below grade, which means anything that,
like where we are.
Basement level, like right where we are. If you can't see out the windows, and if the windows are this big, then that would pretty much be basement area, and as such, given value that way.
So, this is kind of getting a little bit not off topic, but ADUs. I mean, that is such a new.
It's a new thing, right? And we're still so. A lot of times now, and I just left one before I came to see you. The ADU typically, and I think it goes town by town because I'm not going to say it's a statewide practice, but the ADU obviously is allowed statewide now. It's just a matter of how the towns allow them within their town. And of course, everybody should know that you can't just put an ADU in your unit, start building something without permits. You're able to do it, but you still have to get permits for them. But the one that I just left today, he was deemed, yes, you have it as an ADU, and you can have it's not supposed to be rented. It's supposed to be used for family members. I mean, not that your family couldn't pay you rent, but I mean they deem these things as family units for you to give use, so that basically you can allow family members to have extra living area in your property. Other towns I've heard would say no, they've told me I can rent it out and get rental income.
Right, because I was just thinking that as you were talking, I'm like, I feel like in some places I have heard
so
that
you're
allowed to rent it out to non-family members.
Exactly. Yeah. So the only difference in those respects, if I'm doing an appraisal, if I find out that it's really only meant to be used by the family members, I'm really not going to try to give much value, or even I don't know if I should even bother doing. You could do an income approach, but really the income approach is when it's an investment property and you're renting out both units.
Right.
So if these units are to be family occupied, technically there really isn't there could be an income stream, but there really isn't an investment side of it, and so. The bank should realize that it's really a single family dwelling with an additional unit for family. So there could be a semantics thing there.
It's a limitation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like not use.
Exactly. So the use can be varied depending on the town and depending on how they deem it. And interestingly, you might find that in one town they have two different things going on. Sometimes they might say maybe depending on where the sensitivity is in the of traffic, or if it's an area that is more likely to not have multiple units. They may say, okay, you can do this, but it's got to stay within family. As opposed to an area where it's surrounded by multi-units, they'll say, yeah, well, you can deem that as a two-family because it's in an area where, and zoning obviously comes into play with this as well.
And that's something that's hugely important, is just even getting the zoning certificate when we're listing property.
Yes,
because,
thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, one of my friends was saying that, seller thinks that the property has been a 2-unit, always was a 2-unit, has been taxed on it, and then come to find out during the appraisal that it is not.
Right. And I, unfortunately, am probably one of those appraisers that I've given a lot of agita to realtors along the way, because unfortunately, we do find out things that aren't legal in the process of doing our own work. And I'm glad we're kind of segueing out of what we were talking about, but this is an important topic, and we'll go back to that. I teach a class, or I've been teaching a class for years now for the Realtor Association, and I'm a realtor as well. I probably should say that. We're all we're not all realtors, but even a real estate agent is not necessarily a realtor unless you have been part of the real estate, the National Association of Realtors. But as appraisers, we are realtors also. So I always have to kind of say, it's not just that real estate agents are realtors. Property managers can be realtors, appraisers, blah, blah. So, but that said.
But appraisers, you guys need to go through an entirely different set of schooling.
It's different, yes.
Which is great. The amount of schooling you guys need to do is insane.
It is insane now. It was not as insane 40 years ago, but it is insane now. Yes, and it's hard because you spend a lot of time just kind of going through the training process before you can even really get on your own and do the work. So that it's a lot of people call me about my thoughts if people should get into the business. And that's another thing, for another day. But depending on where they are in their life, I really have to kind of know where they are and where they want to go before I can say it's a good or a bad thing for people to do. But back to your point about zoning certificates, it really is important, Meg, that people get these done. When I teach my class, what I was going to say is I always say there's two most important things. And I apologize to all those listening to me. My throat decided to go out this morning. So there's two most important things. The most important thing is that when you're a real estate agent, realtor, and you get a phone call from an appraiser and they say to you, Meg, I'm coming to do the appraisal for 10 Smith Street. When can I meet you? And you say, oh, Jamie, well, you know what? It's on a lockbox. I'll give you the code. Don't do that, please. I can appreciate there are times when people can't meet you and maybe it's got to happen, but you kind of lose all control of the transaction at that point, because I realize we're coming out of an era in real estate, and if you've only been in real estate for less than 10 years, you may think that it's really easy to sell a house and it's just, if that person falls through, there's 10 more behind them. You're going to start finding the market's changing, and that's not the typical way of real estate. And you work so hard in most scenarios to get to the closing, to get to the finish line with the buyer, and you can lose it all in the appraisal. Because if you don't go there, you don't know that I'm the one showing up. I might have somebody that works with me that shows up. You might think, well, Jamie's going. I gave her the contact, the lockbox. I got her phone number here. But if I didn't do it, and even if I did, if we didn't meet, you don't really have a whole lot of stuff to tell me now. I saw what I saw. Maybe you would have said to me, there's some more things I want to point out to you. Maybe I should know them anyway, but who knows? Also,
so what are the things that people should point out to you when they're, if for realtors that are listening, I think it'd be, important to see.
Sure. So meet the appraiser. Number one, meet the appraiser, get their card, know who they are, and so that you can have a conversation. If, in fact, the appraisal becomes an issue, you at least can have a conversation.
Jamie, we got an issue.
Right. Because to be honest, Meg, the other part of it is if nobody came to meet me, I don't feel as obligated. I'm kind of different. I will always try to reach out to people, but I don't feel as obligated to saying, you know what, Meg, I just I'm having a hard time finding data here, and I just wanted to see if you have any more thoughts about things before I finish my report. I don't necessarily feel I have to reach out like I would if we already had a conversation, we met. You said to me, Jamie, here's some data, but I've got some more things that maybe would be of interest to you back at the office if you need anything else. I mean, we really, really try. I mean, I think I can speak for all appraisers that we really, really try to work with the best data we can and support a value that makes sense. Yes, during the last couple of years, not so much the last couple, but during the beginning in the 2020 year, 2021, and people were just throwing money at things that were crazy. It was really hard to support some of those values. Now, things were still exploding and up. And it got easier once a few of those crazy things sold and closed, and then you had a benchmark. But still, now coming down the other side of this at some point, I think you're going to find again it will be hard for appraisers to be able to justify some things.
Oh,
and
yeah.
even though, we do our best, it doesn't mean it's always going to work. And quite frankly, you want your seller, of course, to get the best they can for their house. But as the buyer's representative, you want your buyer to pay a fair price, but not to pay a crazy price either. So there's got to be a happy medium there.
Well, that's literally what just happened with one of my clients. I told her, I'm like, it was a flip. And I'm like, listen, there are no comps that support this price. So we're going to come in at the price that I think it would appraise for. They wanted their price. So I was like, listen, it's just going to, we're going to go under contract. However, the appraisal is going to come back and you have a couple decisions. You're either going to come up with the money, you split the difference, you stay where you are with the number that it's worth, which I think that's what we should do. Or you release from the contract.
Yeah.
So I had already prefaced it with the fact that we were gonna have an appraisal issue, which is, for me, I think it's a good tactic when you are working with buyers. It's like, all right, just give them the price, but it's not. There's no way that you're gonna get that number, and then unfortunately they're gonna be locked in. The seller is locked in.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it is hard both ways. So. Here's the thing. I hate to say, some buyers, they want to pay all out. I'll pay anything for that house, and you know what? Maybe it's not worth nearly that at all. But if it ends up, if appraiser finds stuff that supports it and comes in at that value, then maybe the buyers did really overpay. The problem may end up being that in 2 years, when that buyer wants to refinance, they may find out, oh wow, maybe I really did pay too much, and now I'm not going to be able to refinance at all because I don't even have any equity. I didn't even, I'm minus what I started with.
Well, I think that's probably what people don't even think about. However, I mean, and that's why it kind of depends, on the buyer. I think that sometimes it's like, okay, if you have a house that your daughter is going to be able to live like right behind you.
Right.
You're
Some
like,
people pay for things that.
Yeah. You're like,
right.
You're like, all right, I'll pay the extra $15,000 and come up with it.
Right.
But again, like you're saying, it's just like, is it worth it to pay more than what it's worth?
Mm-hmm. I know. That's been a problem for years now, and and I know a lot of realtors are feeling a sigh of relief a little bit because the craziness is passing, and they can feel that they're more comfortable with what their buyers are paying because it makes more sense. And sellers, are still getting very strong numbers, but I think there's got to be a kind of a back to a reality moment.
Yeah,
here,
because nobody can afford what is happening.
Exactly.
And I mean, honestly, when there was that huge explosion of just, COVID and people were coming in and they're spending like 150, like hundreds of thousands of dollars over what the house is worth. Number one, as a real estate agent, and then just as like I was just like, I can't tell somebody to do that. And so the majority of, and also I'm like, I want to be a listing agent. I don't want to be on the side going up against 25 other offers and then telling my client like, pay over and over and over what it's actually worth. It just It's just not how I wanted to operate my business. And also, again, I was like, I was a new mom. And so I have a 5 and a 7-year-old. And I'm like, why am I going to leave at 5 o'clock at night, which is typically when you're showing buyers? Why am I going to leave at 5 o'clock at night, not be able to like make dinner, sit down, like do all the things I want to do, and then go up against 25 other offers and give people bad advice?
It was a really hard. It was. I feel bad for everybody. It was a really hard time to buy houses, to sell. It was hard all around. And I mean, if you were a seller, it was probably a great time. but still, I mean, it's good that it's hopefully coming back to some normalcy. I want to finish the second point before I forget about it, because I said my first point was show up at the appraisal, which we just talked about, and there's a lot of reasons why you need to do that. Number one, because you want to have an eye contact with that appraiser, and you want to be able to feel you can call them if there's any concerns. The second thing, though, is getting that zoning certificate. I always say my second thing was go to the building inspector's office. I don't care if you see the tax assessor or not. The assessor could say there's 25 units in the property for all I care. It's the building inspector who makes the decisions as to what the legal use is. And they're the ones you hang your hat on as an appraiser. If the legal decision was it's a one family, then it's a one family. I don't care if there's 3 units in it. If the legal decision is a 2 and the seller has it as a single, well, that's fine. They can use it as a single, but they have the option of, which is wonderful. But you really do need to check with building and zoning, because if you don't check with them and then the appraiser does, like you just said, then all hell breaks loose. And then you find out you had this thing sold and now it's not sold. Or maybe it will, but the buyer's now going to have to take a step back because they thought they were getting a legal 2, or they thought they were getting a legal 3-bedroom house and the septic is only a 2-bedroom design. Those are other things, Or they thought that the lower level that was completely finished beautifully with granite and all that, walkout, was a legal unit because the seller said to my face, it's a legal unit. I went to get permitting for everything, for me to go to the zoning office and find out they did not take out one permit for anything, and the whole unit had to be pulled apart because the building inspector had to look at the heating and the plumbing and the electric. And then the buyer didn't want that house anymore because it's now, they got the buyer.
Because they're not being sold what they were sold.
Right, I mean, all the granite countertops could stay, but it wasn't like a kitchen anymore. They had to take out stuff. And so, yeah, it becomes a real nightmare. So do the stuff ahead of time.
Absolutely. And even as a real estate agent and as a seller, you are legally bound to that.
Right.
And so if somebody purchases something without knowing, or with purchases something thinking it's one thing and it's not,
yes,
that you and your seller and you're the lawsuit.
I don't want anybody else to hear what I'm going to say right now. Just between you and me, I'm amazed more people aren't sued. I'm amazed when I go into a property and do an appraisal for a refinance and basically tell people, well, that's not legal. It's a 2-bedroom septic you have. You don't have a 3-bedroom house. You can use it. I don't care how you use it, but I got to write in my report. And they get all upset with me. Or if I have to tell them, that's not a legal unit. That's a finished basement, and they illegally put that kitchen in there, and that's not a legal unit.
Mm-hmm.
I've had many a situation, one only in particular, that somebody wanted to sue me because of my appraisal. When I was telling them what it was, I'm looking at them like, I didn't sell you the house. I'm trying to tell you, unfortunately, what somebody else should have told you already. So it is amazing how many people don't know what they're buying. So that's between us. But.
Yeah, of course. But it's true.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about, you were talking about the income approach.
Oh, okay. So income approach. So there are 3 approaches to value for an appraiser. Sales comparison is the one that you all know because that's the one you see the most. That's where your comparables come in. And we're trying to, look at if you've got a house in a perfect world. Let's say we're working on a ranch. Let's use right down the road on Wilbur Ave, right down the road here. We got 3 ranches in a row, and they all just sold. Well, that would be a super thing. If,
right.
I'd have comparables within a half a mile that are the same thing, and blah blah. That never happens. But in a perfect world, I have an inferior house, a superior house, and one that's very comparable. And then you can kind of look at, and most times we have to give at least 4 or 5 comparables. But if you're just talking about 3, You want to have something that's similar as best you can, and then one that's a little bit lesser, one that's a little bit better, so that a reader can look at it and really come to, oh yeah, this makes sense and it's supported. That's sales comparison. The second approach would be the income approach, which is when you have an investment property. So now we're looking at rental income. So that's the other issue here. If I'm not seeing you at the appraisal and you've got a 2-family and the units are vacant and there's no information on the MLS sheet what things we're renting for prior to, or if there was any rental history, I'm going to glean the market and use comparable data that makes sense to me and use the rental figures that I think make sense. But you might say, oh gosh, no, I just rented a couple. I know of some rentals that are great rentals and they went for much, much more. So rental income is important because you want the stronger the rental income, the stronger the value from the rental side, because you take the rental incomes and you multiply them by a gross rent multiplier, and that GRM,
gross rent
so the gross rent multiplier is a number that's kind of derived from the market, and it's harder to figure out that number than you would hope in most cases, because we don't have strong. It deals with correlating if you have a sales price of a house, a good sales price that just happened, and you have good rental data. It's a division between their income that you get into the sales price of the house comes up with a number. But that's very difficult to get that kind of numbers in a marketplace that you're working in. So you kind of have to make adjustments and figure them out yourself a bit. But you can make a better analysis of it if you have strong rental data that maybe could be supplied by a realtor that knows the area. It's a little bit more easily done with investment properties that are higher than 4 units. An appraiser that does single family and multifamily property, a residential appraiser, can do up to 4 units, 4 banks. I'm talking federal transactions. I could do a 6-unit property on my own for somebody that is not a federal transaction, just for their own purposes. I don't do commercial at all, but a multi-unit that's got more than 4 units is fine. I would disclose to the person. I don't typically do these as much because I don't do commercial work. But in a commercial life, if it's 5 units or more, you have to go commercial, which gets much more involved and typically more expensive for a buyer or going for that kind of financing, just because of the loan type. Under 4 units is a multi-unit property that's under that guideline of residential. So income approach, important to know good income streams. The other approach is cost approach. Cost approach takes the land value and adds it to what we decide a cost value is based on. I have an addendum I use, or I should say it's a cost program estimator program online, and I use that. It's called, the one I use is Craftsman. If there are people in here that are listening that are developers, which we were talking about originally, they probably have a costing program that they use at some point as well. And the idea is you build up the house, then you take out depreciation, then you take that number, add to it site improvements, which would be septic, well, landscaping, pool, blah, blah, any fencing, in-ground pool, not above, and then add your land value to it. So in that case, you kind of need good land sales, which is another thing that's hard to find. Land sales plus cost of improvements or building improvements equals a value. And so those are the 3 approaches: the sales, the cost, and the income.
So typically as a developer, as an agent that works with a lot of developers, for new construction, I feel like it is, which one are you using? Are you using the
sales?
In new
construction, I'm using cost, and I'm using sales and cost. And cost, I have to use cost approach in most all of my reports. For bank appraisals, they make you do a cost approach. Most of them did.
So that what if there's a fire?
Actually, the cost approach, you can kind of look at that, and that helps you a bit with your discerning the value of the improvements, taking the land value out of it. Mm-hmm. That's helpful for your insurance purposes, but also it kind of lends support to the sales comparison. If I finish my sales comparison approach and my value comes in at $600,000, and I finish my cost approach, and I'm as diligent as I can be with what my land is worth and what the cost of the improvements are worth, and it only comes in at $500,000, then I got to step back and say, okay, something's not making sense here. It should be more in line. I shouldn't be that far off. So are they way over? Is the sales comparison, is it really inflated because the sales were people and in the market 3 years ago, yes, people were paying so much more than the value might have been that you would have, hopefully
That
not $100,000 different,
differentiation.
but you'd have that difference. Things should be coming into play a little bit better now because you shouldn't have that much of a difference.
And are you seeing that in the market then, that it's I mean, I think everything's slowing down a little bit and people are getting money back and you're able to negotiate.
Yes, it's slowing down. I think in pockets it's still crazy. It tends to be typical that the bigger cities and where there's more inventory anyway, that tends to see it faster or slow down faster. So I think the Greater Providence area, which is kind of ironic because pretty much the state is the Greater Providence area, if you want to say within a 20-mile radius, you don't have a whole lot after that.
No.
So that people are living in. So that area, I would say, is always going to be more susceptible to maybe the increase or the decreases first because there's just so much more inventory and all there. And then the outlier parts, it takes a little bit longer sometimes. Seasonal properties don't tend to come down as much because people are always looking to buy the seasonal properties.
I live in Narragansett. I'm like,
So
it's
you're
just
seeing
not.
it, right. And the not ironic, but what's happening is in season, and in Newport as well, similarly, you're finding that people would go and buy their property that was their summer property, and now that property is becoming their year-round property because you can't afford to have a summer property and a winter property in most cases. And so you're finding that a lot of people are deciding, I'll pay a little bit more and live in my dream home now, and I'm just gonna we're gonna have the one home, So I think you will find that the seasonal properties don't tend to lose their value maybe as quickly or as strongly as some of the interior properties would, because again, lack of inventory and more buyer appeal.
And so you're telling me that when you're doing an appraisal, you're doing sometimes both the cost.
I'm doing the cost and the sales, and when I'm doing a multi-unit property, I'm doing all three. So, which gives you a really good idea. So, as people that are listening now that look at an appraisal report, look at what other approaches are done because the sales comparison is always going to be done. Now this is talking as in residential world, and then your income approach will be done if there's an investment, and your cost approach may or may not be done depending on the appraiser or depending on what the bank required or if the client didn't require it. But the cost is a nice way to kind of get a feel for, okay, this supports what they're telling me the sales are, or it doesn't, and why. Then ask that question: Why do we have such a difference in values across the board here? And there might be a good reason. But the problem usually is that there's a lack of land sales. Land sales kind of are needed for a good amount of land sales, or at least some good strong land sales that support what's going on right now in the market. But there are towns that don't have much in the way of land sales, and that's when it gets hard. Warwick, you don't find any land sales.
No.
I mean, you're having a hard time doing the cost approach and having a really good relevant land sale unless you can just assume things based on. So like extraction, there might have been a builder that built the property. He owned the whole thing, but you can extract out what they paid for the land, try to figure out what they paid for the land. Was it a reasonable number or was it low? And then work your way into a approach.
So then when a developer is, trying to figure out how much they're going to be able to sell the property for, what are some, items in a appraisal, like in a house, that are going to increase the value?
Good point. So I always wonder when I'm doing an appraisal for that's a new construction. A typical house would well, I shouldn't say. But if you look at let's start with, I guess, if it's typical to the neighborhood. So if you've got, let's say that there's somebody building something right now up in Alpine Estates. I don't know that there's any land available, but let's say they're adding on.
Let's say they're doing it.
And so I find a house that now is a new construction. The builder did a one-car garage, not a two. Everybody's got central air conditioning now, so I'll assume there's central air. But maybe didn't do a master bathroom, or so that becomes not so much a problem for me as an appraiser, because I can still there's still value in what there's done, but it becomes almost an issue more with the buyer. What's the buyer going to reflect for that, because everybody else has the 2-car garage and the master or the primary suite with the primary bath, and now they don't have, this doesn't have that. So sometimes I'm concerned that go over, and if it's not that much more money, put in a 3rd full bathroom, not just a lavette, because now that gives it more value. So instead of 2.5 baths, make it a 3 full bath. Basement area, it's always nice to see finished basement, even though that's not square footage that you include in the living area. Finished basement doesn't take a whole lot more money from a builder's cost perspective, but it'll add to the appraisal. So I guess if we talk about, maybe a better thing to say is, if the builder's trying to maximize the most they can get out of a house they're building, what can they be doing to because let's put it this way, they're going to ask a lot. So to try to get the most out of it so that the appraisal can hopefully match and support what they're hoping they'll get. Finished basements is wonderful. Walk-up attics, if you have the ability. I know, again, this is going to be more expensive because of the roofing and the scuttles or what people do now. But if there's an ability for a walk-up versus a scuttle, and there could be a little staircase, and not even a full staircase, but some have just a partial staircase out of a closet, and then more space. That's more attractive. Not a whole lot more value, but depending on what it costs, it may be worth them doing those things. I guess I'm always thinking that if you can do the little extras, like add, I don't know how much more it is to add the irrigation or add the alarm system, things like that are just add-ons that help too. Because it could be, there are times when the generator, and generators are so important now. I mean, I know these all add up for a builder, and they may be looking at me and saying, Jamie, but we don't do those things. We don't have, depending on what you're trying to get for something. And those little add-ons can be the thing that puts you over the edge. I'm not saying they're worth $100,000, but if you're needing we're like $25,000 probably that we needed more than we, well, what kinds of things did we do? Did we do nice landscaping? Did we do anything over and above the ordinary or the typical that we can get more value for?
Irrigation and alarm systems. I had no idea.
Yeah, that could help. And they may know somebody that does those things, and it's not much more cost. So I guess take your pool of who works in your industry that you're working with, and if you can barter those things, it might help either way. So I don't do a lot of new construction work because I tend to do more private work than bank work. So I realize that cost of new construction is $300 a square foot is like the low end. People are at $500 a square foot. I know in Newport some are quoting $1,000 a square foot. So it's just an insane amount of money for new construction. So I think when people are putting it on as a spec, you're really, you've really got to start thinking about, well, what things can I do that are going to make me more money or bring me in more money, and what things do I not need to do that are not necessary? Maybe you don't have to spend top dollar on those cabinets in the kitchen, because if they're nice quality, they're nice quality. They don't have to be, and the tile doesn't have to be straight from Italy. I mean, you can do things that you don't have to spend quite so much that way, but then on the other side, do things that are going to improve and enhance to be more attractive to an appraiser looking at it as well as a buyer.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, just even thinking about like tiling cost.
Yeah.
Doing that, picking out this tile versus picking out
right.
that tile and then putting in honestly, the alarm system.
Right. And some of the flooring now, I mean, I literally every day I'm getting down on the ground and touching it, like this right here. Hardwood flooring, till you touch it and it's that Lux Vinyl or whatever. You don't know until countertops. I'm always, is this granite? What is it? Because you just can't tell anymore. And sometimes those things don't really matter to the buyer. If it looks nice and it's pretty and it works and it's still a nice quality, it may, and the other additional things may be more attractive in the end.
So and in terms of like sales comparison, you're typically looking at.
Oh yeah. Good
point. You're typically looking at, okay, so you're gonna find the 3 houses in the area that are similar. Obviously, like you'll find multiple ones, but like how I do my CMAs is like I, find ones that are square footage wise similar. Then I, the ones that are like not similar, I just get out. The ones that are too nice, get out of there, and then take those three, and then typically, I'll do like sometimes I'll do the price per square foot, just to get myself close to a good number. But talk to me a little bit about.
Sure. So like you said, try to find your lower, your higher, and your in the middle.
Yeah, you're doing bedrooms, you're doing bathrooms,
but I'm looking at
you're doing garage, you're doing a little bit of land.
People will always say, well, okay, I've got a 2-bedroom house. How much am I going to lose on value because it's not a 3-bedroom? Well, not necessarily, because I'm going to look for other 2-bedroom comparables. So that's the first thing. I'm going to find comparables, hopefully, that have 2 bedrooms. 1-bedroom houses, those are tough because there's not many 1-beds, but I will have to find at least one somewhere, even if I've got to go out 10 miles, because I'm going to have it for a bank. If I wasn't doing this for a bank, then maybe I don't need to find that comp. But I still like to show the client what I would be using. So you want to find comparable bedroom, bathroom counts as much as you can. Square footage. Now you make adjustments for these things, but square footage you'd make an adjustment for, gross living area. Excuse me, square footage differences in the site. If it's an acre lot versus a 10,000 square foot lot, that's a big difference. You need to make some adjustments for that.
And so when you're like, how do you make these adjustments? Is it just like an Excel sheet that you, or whatever you have, and it just like calculates it?
You can line 10 of us appraisers up on a wall right now, and everybody would give you a different answer probably. If you put a gun to my head and said, what's your adjustment? I can't tell you one adjustment because it varies. So a house in Newport, looking at the ocean, although that's got an ocean view, which let's not take that into consideration at the moment, is going to have a different price per square foot for the lot than a house, let's say that's on, acreage overlooking the water versus a 10,000 square foot lot in Cranston that's looking at other residential homes. So there's a land value, that's why you really can't, take a house in one town or another area of the state and use it as a comp. But my homes hopefully will all be similarly sized lots, and if not exact. And if there's like a 10,000 versus a 20,000, well, maybe a 10,000 square foot, a $10,000 adjustment's reasonable, maybe $1 per square foot. And maybe it's not needed because it really doesn't matter. Maybe, you're finding that they're all kind of comparable in sales price, even though the one lot's twice the size of the other. But there's usually some kind of an adjustment made. But it's kind of also, what do I want to say? It's almost like a sliding scale. So I like to tell realtors, because people will say to me, well, how much do you give to a bathroom? How much do you give to a bedroom? Again, bedrooms, sometimes if it's a 4 or a 5-bedroom house, I don't really give it much more than the 4-bed maybe, because that's kind of the nice norm for people.
Yeah,
people like a 4-bedroom house. But if it's superfluous, there's 6 bedrooms, I don't know, does everybody necessarily need that? Some people want one, and that buyer might need it, but I don't know that there's a need to make an adjustment for each. Maybe between 2 and 3, if you can make that, or 3 and 4. A lot of times, though, the adjustment's already made in the square footage of the house. If I've got a 3-bedroom ranch that's 960 square feet versus a 2-bedroom ranch that's 880 square feet, that already 100 and something, or that 100 square foot difference is pretty much the bedroom. So it is the adjustment already. So sometimes you don't need to necessarily make those adjustments. It kind of have to look at the whole picture before you decide that. But from a sliding scale perspective, I try to tell people, $50 a square foot's a reasonable adjustment for an average home now. Like $25 is very low. $100 might be too strong. But 50 is a good number.
For what?
For an adjustment for a house that's, let's say, up to $500,000. Let's say if you've got a $500,000 house in that range, $50 a square foot, figure 10%, whatever.
Okay.
If the house is worth $750 or up to $1 million, maybe, then $75 a square foot's reasonable. $1 million house plus maybe $100 a square foot is reasonable.
And then you were talking about waterfront views.
Yes.
How do you adjust for that?
So that's very subjective also. So you could, again, line 5 of 10 of us up, and everybody's going to say something different. My view of a reservoir or a fresh body of water versus my view of the ocean is going to be different numbers. My view of and then and within that there's caveats. So let's say, and Newport's a good example because there's all different kinds of views. So people having views of the Newport Bridge and the harbor, those are really commanding views. Buyers I see will pay more money for that view versus having an open, distant view of, like, if you're looking out at the ocean. In a lot of cases. Sometimes not. Sometimes that buyer will pay as much to look at that view of the ocean. But the bridge, the lights on the bridge, the harbor, the boats in the harbor, there are people that will certainly pay strong money for those views. And then, people will pay strong money for views of mountains. We don't have mountains really here in Rhode Island, so it's hard to. But people don't typically, or they'll pay views for just vistas. I know in Cumberland there's a lot of areas where there's high elevation and they just got views on, and those you kind of just have to look at those, try to find comparable sales that also have kind of a view, and say, okay, those are comparable. And in a perfect world, if everything else was similar, but they paid $50,000 more or $25,000 more because of that view, that could be your adjustment. Mm-hmm. What we do is, in the appraisal world, when we learn appraisal, we have to do what's called paired sales analysis. And when you do that, you try to find two properties that have everything similar and only one, and this gets difficult, it's almost, very difficult, but everything's similar, but one has one thing, like one has a 2-car garage, the other doesn't. And if everything else matched up and there was like a $25,000 difference, because the 2-car garage probably was a $25,000 that was paid by one. It's easier to do. It's easy to do if you have a new development, and the builder puts something in one and not in the other, and then you can see the differences. That makes it kind of a nice way to try to figure things out. But that's a perfect world, and there's not always that perfect scenario. But a good point to make as a realtor, though, is that if you do have views or you do have some special items, that's why you want to be at that appraisal, and you want to point those out and say, you may not have looked out of the back deck here, but the reason these sellers love this house is because if you see, this view goes straight down to the city, and you can kind of see the Capitol building. And so different things like that can play into the report and you need to sometimes point those things out. Even the appraiser should see all that, but sometimes, let's say it's a foggy day, and I don't know, is there ocean out there someplace? I know you're not living on the ocean, but could I see it if it wasn't a foggy day? Those are the things that you kind of have to tell somebody. And also, the park is right down here. Did you know this, that the park's there, the elementary school's down here? That's why this is such a strong neighborhood for the people, because they love walking distance to the park and to the school for their kids. Those are important things for people to know.
Absolutely. I mean, I always, when I can, but I'm always at the appraisal. Absolutely. Because I think it's super important, just that face-to-face.
Yep. And you may know that the house next door sold. And a lot of times, if it's a private sale, most times if it's a private sale and it's in the town records, I'm not going to know why did that sell lower. If I can find out from somebody, of course, I do. But if you don't know, but you may know as the realtor, or you may know because your seller may have said, oh, that house that just sold, the reason that sold so low is because it was sold to a family member.
Right.
You don't know those things.
Right.
So important for you to point that out to the appraiser.
Absolutely. So what kind of technology do you use?
So my equipment is called Win Total. A la Mode is the software that I use. But as far as I know, it's funny because I got an email the other day asking me if I used AI in my reports, and I said, "Oh no, I'm a dinosaur. I don't really use any AI." And they said, "That's the answer we wanted." And I thought, well, most of us are ready to retire. Are the only people that can probably say that because everything is AI driven now. The only software that I use that's not part of my a la Mode technology, which isn't really which is technology, but it's really more the support from my software for my typing my appraisal reports, is that Craftsman Book Company software, which is the cost estimator program. And that's great because it makes you, and you may find that you do a lot of work with builders, and you may find you ask them about this, and they may say, oh, we find that software, the numbers aren't really accurate because the costing of materials goes up so crazily. But they do ask you, you have to put in the address of the property, of course, and so, you're putting in your location, your town, your state. and they do adjust based on those costing things. So the Northeast is a much more expensive place to build than if you go to the South. So they take into consideration the programs.
Interesting.
So that is a helpful tool. Aside from that, only other real technology I use, aside from things that I get on the internet from the a la mode technology, would be the laser gun, which isn't really it's technology, but it
something
helps you to measure the interiors. As builders, they work with a format, and it's called ANSI, ANSI, and it's got to do with the standardization of the way that they calculate building. And the American, the Builders Association, the architects, and other affiliates that deal with building homes tend to use that standardization format to measure homes.
Awesome.
In the past 10 years, the realtors and anybody in the real estate field has been asked, we now also follow that guideline for federally related transactions. So if I'm appraising it for a bank, I know I'm using that same type of what do I want to say? That same way to do my measurements, my calculations, as the architects / builders. So there are differences in how we would typically before anyway. Now those differences, those nuances have more come together because we've all tried to get on the same page. But in the past, there has been more of a divergence between how one party would do the measuring as far as compared to another party.
Awesome.
So.
And then I always ask everybody on the show, but like you, Jamie, is there any book or podcast that you personally, outside of appraisals, would recommend or that you love?
Oh, interesting. Gosh, I've never really thought about that. I do listen to a lot of talk stuff because I'm driving so much. I get bored with music, but I know, and books on tape. But I hate to say, I don't do a lot of podcasts yet. I'm going to have to start.
Well, I do books on tape too. I do Audible a lot of times.
Right. No, I know. And I think in this environment that we're in now, where just there's so much thrown at you, that you're just trying to maybe have 5 minutes to breathe.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's almost just good to shut off everything, right? I noticed I got on my computer 2 days ago, and this was the first time I saw this. In the corner, when it opens up, typically, it's got the front page, and then it goes into some ads before I can log on to something. But in the corner, it just had this little emoji, and he was just breathing in and breathing out. And I thought, oh, that's nice, just as a kind of just
reminder
to remind you to just shut it all down. So I think probably my advice, if nobody has said it, is just shut it all off and just drive.
It's funny. I do like a lot of meditation, and I do read
important.
I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of things. But even just like sitting down and like reading a book and just having that quiet space. But also like I walk a lot, so
Yes.
just walking without the phone or listening to music and just being.
Exactly. I think it's harder as I should just bring this up too about as a real estate person now, salesperson now in this world. You've got to be so on every minute. Your buyer expects to hear from you every moment, and that's just not the way it should be. I mean, we still need to have our downtime. You still need to have, and I'm as much to blame as anybody because I just work 24/7, and I know that's wrong. So I'm preaching something that I don't practice myself, but I do think it's important to unplug from that so much. I mean, they expect, but you've got to have your time too, I mean, I think that's become the problem. Everybody expects in 2 seconds you're going to get that
everything, instant gratification.
Right.
No,
right.
I totally agree. I'm like, I'm not a doctor, but I am on call.
Right.
All day, every day. And I always say, I'm like, well, I haven't had a vacation in like 8 years, even though I get to be where I want to be when I need to be. However, we're still tied to that phone, answering questions, negotiating deals, negotiating repairs, and just problem solving.
Yeah, life was much easier when you didn't have a cell phone. I mean, there's a lot of great things that come from that, but when you could go out and do an inspection and come back to your office and have something on your voicemail saying, "Oh, could you call me?" That was nice, you know.
Right. Instead of being like distracted all the time.
Exactly.
Was there anything else you wanted to kind of touch
I know.
base on?
I appreciate that, Meg. I was just trying to think if there's anything else we really need to talk about. I think an important thing to talk about now is when you own, now that you're, buying these homes and they're expensive and you're paying top dollar for things, I think it's also important that you really are cognizant of your assessments, what you're paying in taxes, obviously. So when your new assessments come out, because obviously every town's going to be reassessing, and they're going to be using all this data from these last 3 years that have been really, really strong, high property values, and they're going to spit out really high values that they say your home is worth. Excuse me, and maybe you've paid more than your house is assessed for, and that's nice. If that happens, that's great. Excuse me again.
Well, I mean, yeah, when you're looking before, when we would even some ways that people would look at like how much a house was worth, they would be like, well, if you look at the assessment, typically it's
a little bit lower.
A little bit, yeah, it's lower, but like by kind of a significant, like a third lower.
Right,
so you would expect.
Right.
When you're just trying to figure out like what something's worth, but now it's like not the case.
Exactly.
So you're saying
so my point is, look at your assessment. Look at the field card, which is what the tax assessor has about your property, and just really do a good deep dive into looking at that field card and making sure everything's accurate. If you have 2 bathrooms and they say you have 3, if you have your house isn't as big as what they say, or your lot size isn't as big, and if it comes to the point that you're really concerned, I just did one this morning for a woman whose assessment went up at $300,000. She's got a 1-bedroom condominium, and it's
wild.
And it's a lot of money for her. She's in a nice area, but it really is a significant difference in value. And so hopefully I can get her assessed, I don't know if I can get her assessed value down. Hopefully my appraisal value will be lower than her assessment, and she can bring that to the tax assessor and say, I don't understand, and I have to make a very rational, cogent, supported effort, or appraisal, and say okay. And there are times when I do these things and I say I'm sorry, but what it is, and you really are getting assessed for what it's worth, even though you don't want to hear that. But there are definitely times when people, and it's not that an assessor can certainly be wrong sometimes, because they're doing mass appraisal work. They're not going in like I am and doing one-on-one.
Yeah.
They're looking at everything as a whole, and it's data going in and data being spit out.
Right. They're not going.
So there's times when they're going to be off, and there are times when they're going to be hopefully on your side of it and lower than they should be, but there might be times when they're really high the other way, and so be cognizant of that, because obviously the market's been so insane now that you want to make sure you're not over-assessed and overpaying for things that you shouldn't be paying for.
Right, absolutely. All right, well, there's a couple other questions that I typically have. What is your mantra?
Oh, my mantra. Like, what do I try to say?
No, just, in general. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say yourself? I don't know.
I know.
How do you go through life?
Oh, I know, huh? I do try to think, just try to be happy. I mean, try to, and realize that, we don't know what's going on in somebody else's mind either, right? And so we have to just really try to every day glean that thing. And I always love the people that say, I try to wake up and say, what's that one thing that I'm most happy about, or feel I
grateful for,
most grateful for today, and if you can kind of do that, I mean, that's so important, obviously. I'd like to think, there are a lot of times when I'd like to think that I think those ways, and you're so busy just doing your driving, you don't think about the things you should. But I guess smelling the roses is kind of one of those most important things.
I love that.
Yeah. Try to do that. We don't do enough of that. That's important.
But we can do it all the time. I just did the one last girl that was here, even just so she has like a tea company. She's also getting into the real estate industry, and I was just saying, like, even just like holding there's something so peaceful and meditative about just even holding like a hot cup of tea.
Oh, true. Yep, that's very
just
good.
Taking that moment of being present and just be like, Oh,
Right, right.
smelling,
I
just
know.
smelling, feeling, tasting, the
yep.
whole thing. But how can people get in touch with you? And also, like, when would it be appropriate? So you talked about just even like the tax assessors,
Sure, sure.
privately,
Yeah.
obviously, if
So
with
the
a
tax bills,
bank.
as soon as the tax bills come out, take a look. I know that sometimes you get busy and you just throw that in a pile because you're not going to be dealing with it right away.
Right,
You know,
'cause who wants to?
But the truth is, when those tax bills come out, there's always a place there that says if you want to dispute your taxes,
Yeah.
basically, you have to appeal by such and such a date. And so you might lose out just because you don't get filed before that date. So make sure you take into consideration when you've got to get back to the tax assessor's office and put your name in. And even if you say, well, I don't have, you might look at your number and think it's high, but you may not know. Well, at least make a phone call. Just make a phone call anyway. Get your
Right.
name on the docket.
Right.
And then if I come out or an appraiser goes out there and says, you know what, you're really assessed pretty good. Your assessment's not high, so we can't really do much about it. All right, well then take your name off the docket, but at least you're on.
Right.
Because if you don't put yourself on and then you lose the date and the ability to, and now you're stuck until the next cycle,
Right.
the next year.
Right.
And so you've lost out on that option.
Right.
So important to do that. Also important if you're a veteran or if you're someone who's got a disability or if you're a senior citizen and they have exemptions in your town.
Yeah.
Make sure you're taking advantage of those exemptions because those can add up too.
Yeah.
I mean, people that have are blind, veteran, homestead exemptions. If maybe your house was rented for years and didn't get the homestead exemption and now you're moving back into it, make sure that the town knows that it's now owner occupied because that homestead exemption could be a big plus for you. And you're not paying,
Absolutely.
so anything you can do to look at that tax assessment and see if there's a way to bring down those numbers is important.
And how can people get in touch with you?
Oh, in touch with me. So I have one phone number, so you can get me on the one phone number. My name is Jamie Moore, as I said. So first off, if you want to email me, that's fine. And it's my name. It's JAM as in Mary, IE, D as in Diane, MOORE. Jamie D. Moore at Verizon.net. And my phone is 401-743-2963. And yeah, happy to talk to anybody.
Are you licensed in
I'm
where?
only in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island.
And
Great.
and to be honest, it's kind of my swan song because I'm pretty much phasing out. I now live in Maine. I moved to Maine this past year, and I come down 1 month out of the one week out of the month.
Yep.
And see my family, see my mom, do the stuff I need to do, appraise houses, and kind of go back and then type and then come back down again. So I'm kind of in a pattern for the rest of this year doing that.
I love
So
that.
yeah, but happy to help whoever I can in that time frame. The one thing I should say, you asked me, is there anything I should say? And my mantra should be this: manage expectations. I'm looking at that at the bottom of my list of things I say to the realtors when I teach the class. Manage expectations, really important. And I say that to a realtor from the standpoint of the buyer and the standpoint of the seller. If you've got a seller, especially now that the market's changing, if you've got a seller and they say, oh, my neighbor got everybody got $500,000 for their house. Let's start with a higher number. My
Like $1
neighbor
million, yeah.
Right. My neighbor got $1 million for their house.
Right.
And I want to get $1.1 million. I've got the same house. Well, yeah, we're going to do what we can do. And you do. You do have the same house. You do have a great house. But we also see that the market's changing a bit and that there's been, there's a tightness happening a bit. And so we're going to hope that, but we should also realize that prior to that neighbor getting that price, the highest price in your neighborhood was this. And we'll get more than that, I think, but we need to realize that maybe we're not going to get 1.1 because you don't want some seller to think, I'm going to get all that in the next thing, and then they get an offer of 950 and they say, nope. Because I'll tell you, I only sold real estate for 5 years, but the one thing I learned more than anything is many times your first offer is your best offer, and you walk away from that offer and you don't ever get it again. And I'm not saying that you can't negotiate with that first person that makes that good offer. But if they walk away, you may never get that 9.9950 offer again. So manage expectations well with your seller that we're going to do the best, but understand where we are with the market. And buyers, similarly, they push that number that they'll pay for the house because they want it so badly. Mm-hmm. And it may not appraise for that number. And if you say to them, you know what, we know you want it, but we also know you've got $10,000 worth of closing costs built into this thing, and we don't know if it's going to appraise. So you may want to consider who can you get that money from if you need to get a gift of equity, if you need to do something to get some money out of it so that you can buy it. Because you don't want to get down to the bottom line and have everything hinging on that appraisal. The seller upset because it didn't appraise at value, when you could have told them, I told you this was going to be tough because we already know what the comps are.
Oh, I tell that to people all the time.
And we talked about that earlier.
I just don't.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is what it's worth. We can list it at a higher number, but I send them a net sheet as to like the lowest number, which is like, this is the number we're actually looking at.
So you've been good about managing the sellers in that way. And managing the buyers is important too, because you need to say to them, I know you want this house, but we know you need these closing costs. We know that you need,
right.
And we may not be able to get that.
Yeah, and so people know it's like the closing costs. So you put in an offer, you say, okay, I need $10,000 in closing costs. That's what the bank charges you. However, when the appraisal comes, they're not factoring that in. So you're going to need to come to the table with the $10, $12, $15,
if it appraises out, including the closing costs, then great.
That's great, but sometimes
if
it doesn't.
And especially in this market when it's been so tight to begin with. It's hard to make that happen in a lot of cases. So yes, so managing expectations is
I love that.
Good way to wrap that up.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for
You're
coming
welcome,
on the
Meg.
show. I super
Pleasure to speak
appreciate
with you.
it.
You're welcome. You're going to do well in this business. I was told you were a good firecracker, and you are. Good
Thank
for you.
I love it. Well, that's it for today's episode of The Landlady Listens, where we turn vision into reality. Remember that success starts in your mind before it ever shows up in your life. Keep believing, keep building, and most importantly, keep taking action. And until next time, trust the process, bet on yourself, and go create the life that you deserve. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with somebody who needs to hear it. Thank you so much, guys. We're off. Meg Hayden, the landlady. We'll talk to you soon. Bye. That's it for today's episode of The Landlady, where we turn your vision into a reality. Remember, success starts in your mind before it ever shows up in your life. Keep believing, keep building, and more importantly, keep taking action. And until next time, trust the process, bet on yourself, and go create the life that you deserve. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Love you.